The following is a DW Ancient Babylon production. The basic element of the political organization of Babylonia at this time was the city-state, defined as an urban city directly controlling a hinterland with a radius of about 15 kilometers, where people lived in villages. Their city-states relied heavily on agriculture and as a result had to be near rivers in order to irrigate their crops. Located primarily along the Euphrates River, they learned to develop relatively short canals in order to expand their needs. Throughout Babylonia, about 35 city-states existed, more or less evenly divided over the region. The steppe lay between the cultivated and permanently inhabited zones and was used for seasonal animal herding and hunting. This area was only indirectly controlled by the urban centers. In the early 3rd millennium, Babylonia experienced a general population growth which was possibly accelerated by immigration or by the settling down of semi-nomadic groups. There was a regional trend toward urbanism, with the cities and the villages surrounding them becoming larger in size. The smaller hamlets seem to have disappeared. The city-states at first were located at sufficient distance from one another, but the increased population necessitated an extension of the cultivated areas and the borders began to overlap. This process may have been aggravated by a gradual drying of the climate, causing a lowering of the sea levels and a retrenchment of the rivers into fewer branches. A fundamental element in the Mesopotamian ideology was the concept that each city was the dwelling place of a particular god or goddess. Cities were thought to have been developed in primordial times for the gods, each of whom acted as their patron deities. Examples: Nana for Inanna for Uruk, and Enlil for Nippur. This concept was linked to the role of the temple. The temple's function as collector and distributor of agricultural resources was founded in the ideology that the god received them as gifts and redistributed them to the people. As a result, the head of the temple administration served as leader in the city, and the temple became the largest structure, sometimes built on an earthen platform towering over the other buildings. The gods were imagined as living in a world parallel to that of humans, so each god had a household, spouse, children, and servants. These dependent deities also had smaller temples and shrines in the cities, sized according to their status, and each city had a multitude of temples. With the expansion of the city-states, competition for the remaining open areas developed and soon led to wars for cultural land. A leader's military rather than cultic role became of primary importance in such situations. As in the later Sumerian stories reflecting on this period, the people granted a war leader authority on a temporary basis only. In a moment of crisis, the popular assembly elected a strong man as leader, while that body controlled his movements. This system has been called primitive democracy and may have eventually led to a dynastic system under which rule was passed on from father to son. In the early dynastic period, we see the first appearance of the palace, identifiable as such by its residential plan. Moreover, documents at the time mention a new central institution, the Great House, which in later periods clearly refers to the royal household. This is distinct from the house of the city of God, the temple. The city-state Lagash during this period seems to document the attempt to harmonize the two bases of power. The last independent head of the state in the early dynastic period, around 2400 BC, was a usurper by the name of Uruk-agina. Early in his reign, he proclaimed a reorganization of the state, ostensibly removing control over the agricultural land from himself and his family, and granting it to the city god and his family. However, he retained this property along with other sources of wealth by changing the household of his wife to the household of the city's goddess. The king ruled by divine favor, but he was totally in control of the god's earthly possessions, so any prior distinction between secular and divine authority had disappeared. Uruk-agina's measures turned out to be short-lived, but the merging of divine and earthly authority was not. Later kings all proclaimed that their powers derived from the gods, but they controlled temple property, and the actual basis of their power was their military skill.